In this video, I'm going to give an overview of our textbook and also walk you through our first reading in it. So, one important thing to realize about this class is that it's very self directed, meaning that you're going to be doing most of the learning on your own. And our Bedford textbook is a really good textbook to walk you through the writing process. And it's very good about breaking things down into steps and guiding you. So, I want to explain how the textbook is organized so that you get the most out of it. So, some ways that we'll be using this textbook are to cover the different stages of the writing process. And you'll kind of find that in part one, which we'll be reading chapter one in, and that's the only chapter from that unit. And then also in part three, we'll kind of go through a lot of these writing strategies, which are the different stages of the writing process, which we'll learn about this week. Another way we'll be using this textbook is to understand different types of essays. So for each essay you have, that's a major essay, we'll be covering that chapter on that essay type, and there'll be 4 of those types of essays in the course. And we'll get into that more next week. And then another area of this textbook that we'll be using it for is on how to do research and find sources. So you'll be finding us doing a lot of that kind of in the upcoming weeks around weeks 3, 4, and onward. Then the last area where we'll be using this textbook is for grammar, punctuation, and formatting. Okay, so you can find those chapters toward the back of the book, and you're welcome to even read and view additional ones that aren't assigned in the course. Now, as you're going through each chapter or reading, there are a few features I want you to pay attention to. So, one are the learning by doing exercises. You're not required to do these, but I do recommend that you at least pause, maybe kind of read through the descriptions, and maybe kind of do them on your own, even if it's just sort of walking through them in your own mind. That'll give you a richer experience when going through the textbook. And of course, some of your exercises are actually these learning by doing exercises from the textbook. And to find out which ones you have to do, you can just go in the syllabus. So the ones in the syllabus are the ones you have to do. Otherwise, you're not required to do them or turn them in. Another feature that's very helpful is to pay attention to these little itty bitty notes in the margins. They'll point you to additional places in the textbook that will elaborate on the information that's in that paragraph or section to give you additional resources. And that can be really helpful if you're struggling with an area. Look for this little notes in the margins to see if there's somewhere else in the textbook that'll give you more info. And then the last thing is sometimes you will find these little checklists, and I highly recommend using these when you're writing the essays. They are just a good mental walkthrough to make sure you're covering everything in the essay that you need to. Now that I've kind of given you an overview of how the textbook is structured, I want to go over the first chapter in our textbook. But before I focus too much on that, I want to explain what the learning goals and objectives are for the week. When you understand what the objectives are, it'll help you get more out of the reading and understand why you're being assigned these chapters. So, for our first couple of objectives for this week, learn what the writing process is and how the writing process works for you personally as a writer. These concepts will be covered in chapter 1, and they're really the foundation of learning how to write, and everything else is going to be built off of understanding the writing process. Then the next 3 goals: learn how to start drafting a paper, learn the different types of paragraphs, and learn what makes a good topic sentence and how to write one. All of these are covered in chapter 17, and these are kind of like the building blocks of an essay, essentially. You can't really write a good essay without understanding paragraphs and how they work. And then lastly, which is learn how to generate ideas for a paper, this will be covered in chapter 15. And again, this is kind of really the first stage of the writing process. You have to have an idea before you can start to write. Okay, so now that we have that, what I want you to do is go ahead, pause this video, read chapter 1, and then come back and finish off this video. And it should take you between 10 to 15 minutes to read that chapter. You just finished reading chapter 1, the writing process. So now I'm going to kind of explain this process in my own words and how I see it. So a lot of times when we think of writing, we sort of just start right here at stage 4. We just think of the act of putting our fingers on the keyboard or the pen on the paper and writing. But an important thing to realize about the writing process is that there's actually a lot of work that goes into it before we ever sit down and start typing. And that work is done in these first 3 steps. One, which is discover. This is figuring out, what are you actually going to write about? What is the topic? What do you want to say? And who do you want to say it to? Sometimes for essays, the teacher will give you a lot of this, but sometimes they're going to leave it very open ended, and you're going to have to do the part of discovery to figure this out on your own. The next step, which isn't always in every single writing process, but it's in a lot of the ones for college, which is sources. This is, what information related to the topic are you going to use? Are you allowed to use personal experience? Do you need to go and find outside sources and find other facts and opinions of what other people have said? Are you focusing on analyzing a text that you read for the course? So this is where source comes into play, and you decide, how is the source going to support what you wanted to say and what you figured out in the discovery phase. Then the third step is plan. Okay, so this is where you take all of your information ideas and you create sort of like an outline or just a direction for where your draft will go. And then, like I said, the drafting part is just where you put your fingers on the keyboard and you type out your ideas. And then the last stage is the revise edit stage. And we like to shorten this one or sidestep it or even combine it with drafting. But it really is an important stage where you sort of step back, look at a completed draft, and then say, okay, where can I reorganize my ideas to make them clearer? Where can I be more concise in my wording? Where do I fix my grammar and punctuation and things like that? Now, while the textbook makes this seem very linear, this process, it's actually a bit messy. So, say I'm down here in my drafting and I realize, oh, I kind of need to go back and find a source um, for this idea I have. Or maybe you're in the planning stage and you're going, I really don't like this idea. I kind of want to get back up here to discover and maybe choose a new topic. Or maybe you're even revising your paper and you're going, this organization's horrible. I need to kind of go back here to plan and recreate my outline. So, really, the process of writing is very messy and chaotic. And just keep that in mind when you're writing. If you're kind of being a bit messy and going through multiple parts of this writing process at the same time, it doesn't mean you're a bad writer. All writers do that, even excellent writers and good writers. That's just the way the writing process is. But what will happen is you'll eventually kind of move through each stage and you'll stop going back to it. And of course, there just are deadlines, and at some point, you just have to end the writing process and accept the draft where it is at that moment. So keep that in mind. If you're ever feeling overwhelmed, just sort of stop, take a deep breath, and say, okay, which part of the writing process am I really in? And just focus on that stage. All right, so I want you to make this writing process personal to you. So here are some questions, and they're located in the worksheet, and I want you to just go through them and answer them. So, basically, the writing process as it's described, how would you describe your process? Is it pretty linear? Do you maybe actually go through each of these in isolated progression, or do you kind of jump all over the place? Okay, which part of the process is the most difficult for you or the easiest? That might be a good place to focus your energy in this class. Where do you want to improve? And then what was the last thing you wrote? Kind of analyze, what was your process like for that? Maybe it was a work email or a paper for a class. And then also, does your writing process differ between different types of writing? So that could be school versus work or personal, or maybe between research papers or just, lab reports. How is it different? So go ahead and go to the worksheet, fill out these questions and answer them. And then also, when you've done with that, go ahead and jump on to chapter 17, Strategies for Drafting, in our textbook, and read that. So altogether, answering the questions and doing this reading probably will take you around 30 minutes. And when you're done with that, go ahead and move on to the next video for this worksheet.